Hi, I'm Kareem, and you are watching Oversliced. Have you ever wondered what it would take to modify your single filament printer to print with 2, 3, 4, or even more filaments at the same time? Maybe you want to print with more colors, or perhaps you want to use soluble supports. In this video, I'll share with you how I modify two of my printers to print with 4 filaments at the same time using 4 extruders and a single nozzle. Note that this video is not a tutorial. I will not be showing you how to modify your printer's firmware. The intention behind this video is to serve as a reference and starting point for anyone considering making such a modification themselves. By the end of this video, I hope to share with you how I modified my single filament printer to print with 4 filaments at the same time and go from printing great prints like these in single color to amazing prints like these with multiple filaments at the same time. So what all do you need before you can modify your printer to use 4 filaments? Your printer will need to meet the following criteria before you can start. You'll need a Bowden setup. This modification will not work with direct drive extruders. If your printer doesn't already have a Bowden style extruder setup, you'll need to make that modification first. You'll need a printer board with room for additional steppers. Now this can be a tricky one. Most 3D printer boards usually already come with room for a second stepper driver. And if you only want the ability to print with 2 filaments, then this is all you need. But if you want the capability to print with more than 2 filaments, then you will need to see if your printer can support stepper expansion. RAM's 1.4 board, for instance, has an expansion board that you may purchase that will allow you to add 2 more steppers. If you are not using RAM's 1.4 board, or if you don't have the ability to add an expansion board, then there may still be a way. You'll need a compatible firmware with multiple extruder capabilities. You'll need to modify your firmware to enable multiple extruders. This requires some knowledge about how to modify firmware source code to activate features as well as enable configuration from multiple stepper drivers. Do not attempt to modify your printer's firmware unless you're absolutely sure about it, as you run the risk of doing permanent damage to your printer board. On my printers, I have successfully set up multi-material printing with Marlin 119 using RAM's 1.4 board and an X2 expansion board on one printer, as well as on another printer with Clipper firmware using 2 RAM's 1.6 boards. If your printer meets these criteria, then you're ready for the next step. When printing with multiple materials at the same time, you run the risk of clogs and jams, as with every tool change, the printer has to unload old filament and load new filament into the nozzle. Fortunately, this can be prevented easily if you use the right parts for your upgrade. The following parts will ensure that you don't clog your printer's nozzle when printing with multiple filaments. E3D Titan extruder or Bondtech BMG extruder or their clones. These extruders come with 3-to-1 gear reduction, which results in a lot more torque being generated when pushing the filament through. This also means that your extruder steps per millimeter will need to be adjusted in your firmware. Tough titanium Heatbreak. This allows the PTFE tube to run through the heat break into the melt zone all the way to the nozzle. This further helps eliminate clogs that usually happen in the melt zone. And instead of a 0.4 mm nozzle, consider using a 0.5 mm nozzle. Finally, you need these parts to complete your setup. Stepper motors and drivers for additional extruders, M6 pneumatic fittings to lock the PTFE tube in place on the extruder and feed adapter, high quality PTFE tubes to run from the extruders to the feed adapter and from the feed adapter to the hot end, and 2-to-1 or 4-to-1 filament feed adapter. You should be able to find the STL for these on Thingiverse. Ensure that your feed adapter has threads for M6 fittings. Now that you know what parts are needed for the upgrade, let's talk about the slicer. In order to print with multiple filaments, you'll need a suitable slicer. You can use the slicer of your choice as long as it supports configuring multiple extruders and generating a purge tower. You'll need the ability to generate purge tower to flush out old filament from the nozzle when the tool change happens. Prusa slicer and matter control allow generating purge towers. If your slicer doesn't already have that capability, there's a program called Filiswitch that you might find interesting. Once you are sure your printer meets the necessary criteria for the upgrades and you have the necessary parts, you can proceed with the actual installation. Install the motors and the extruders on the printer. Install the pneumatic fittings on the feed adapter. Run the PTFE tube from the extruder to the adapter and from the adapter to the hot end. Ensure the feed adapter is held secure in place. You don't want it to move from its place during printing. Make the necessary changes to the firmware and flash it to the printer. You are now ready to test your printer's newfound multi-material capabilities. In a future video, I'll share with you how you can set up Prusa Slicer to handle multi-material printing with single nozzle on your custom multi-material printer. I will also show you how you can take your existing single color models and print them in multiple colors easily from Prusa Slicer. Be sure to leave a comment below, and if you enjoyed this video, please like it and consider subscribing to the channel. If you've watched the video this far, you're amazing. It's been a great experience putting this video together. I look forward to seeing you next time.